The first time Rowan Hale saw Mira standing in the sunlight that spilled through the half-open barn door, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. An ache that was part worry, part recognition, and part the strange pull of witnessing someone trying not to collapse under the weight of their own world. Her shoulders were trembling, though she stood perfectly still, hugging her arms against herself as if bracing for one last blow life hadn't delivered yet. And when she whispered, barely louder than the wind, "I could use a strong hand," she didn't look away. She held his gaze like someone clinging to the final thread of their own courage. That single moment felt like a storm gathering inside the quiet. It was impossible to know then, but everything his past, her pain, all the invisible grief between them, was about to change in ways neither of them could have scripted. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of showing up when someone needs it most, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kind of Heart. It truly helps more stories like this reach the world. Rowan had returned to the small countryside town of Ellenshore to escape, not to rebuild. He wasn't searching for meaning, redemption, or connection. He had lost most of that after the accident that took his younger brother, Soren, a year before. He moved like a man trying to outrun both memories and mirrors, taking a job restoring old farm structures because it required more muscle than conversation. But that morning, when he'd been sent to inspect the collapsed beams in the Hanlon barn, he didn't expect to find Mira Hanlon eyes rimmed with exhaustion, clothes dusted with hay, and determination cracked just enough to let the truth spill through. Her parents' farm had always been a quiet landmark in town, but her father's sudden stroke 2 months earlier had left Mira, barely 27, running the entire place alone. There was a weariness in her posture that spoke louder than her words. Rowan recognized it instantly. It mirrored his own from the months following the accident, when he'd pushed so hard to keep moving that he nearly destroyed what was left of himself. She stood, surrounded by the remnants of what had once been a sturdy structure, fallen boards, splintered beams, and dust catching the daylight like floating memories. She had tried to fix things on her own. The scattered tools on the ground made that clear. But the farm was too much for one person, and the barn collapse was only the loudest of many failures pressing down on her shoulders. Rowan knelt beside a cracked beam and examined the damage. His trained eye saw the job would take days, maybe weeks, and he knew instantly she couldn't wait that long for help. Emotionally, she was already at the edge. When he looked back at her, he saw a woman fighting the kind of battle that turns quiet strength into silent collapse. And though he didn't understand why, something inside him shifted not with pity, but with a pull towards someone who reminded him of a life he had almost forgotten, a life where helping someone mattered. As Rowan began working on the barn, Mira hovered nearby, offering water, small explanations, and hesitant thanks. The more he worked, the more he noticed what wasn't being said. Her hands shook when she carried tools. Her breath caught whenever she glanced toward the farmhouse window where her father once stood watching the fields. She moved like someone tiptoeing around grief, not wanting to wake it. Rowan knew enough about grief to recognize the signs, but he didn't press. He only worked steady, methodical. And for Mira, that was enough. Day after day, they fell into a rhythm. Rowan repaired beams, replaced panels, secured braces. Mira tended to chores, her presence circling him like a soft orbit of quiet determination. He heard her humming sometimes, a distant broken sound that made the air feel heavier. And though she rarely shared anything personal, her eyes said more than words ever could. They carried a smallness of hope and an exhaustion that made Rowan's chest tighten whenever he caught her staring across the fields with that brittle, faraway sadness. The turning point came on the 5th morning. Mira emerged from the farmhouse with reddened eyes, pretending she had simply woken early, but Rowan could tell she had been crying. Something inside him resisted staying silent. He picked up another beam but spoke anyway, not raising his voice, not daring to push. He said the simplest truth, one that didn't pry but invited. That was when Mira stopped walking. The wind swayed the golden grass behind her, sunlight outlining her like a fragile silhouette about to shatter. She admitted her father's health was declining faster than the doctors predicted, that the bills were stacking up, that she hadn't slept in weeks. And finally, quietly, trembling, she said she didn't know how much longer she could do this alone. She held her breath, as if waiting for judgment or pity. But Rowan only nodded, the softness in his expression telling her she didn't need to apologize for breaking. And that afternoon, when the barn roof began to take shape again, something else began to rebuild too. Mira's ability to trust that she didn't have to carry the entire world alone. Rowan found himself returning even on days when the work didn't require him. He repaired fences Mira hadn't asked him to fix. He hauled feed bags from the shed to save her the strain. He even taught her small tricks, ways to secure beams with less force, ways to balance heavy tools without overexertion. She watched him with a mixture of gratitude and confusion, as if trying to understand why someone who barely knew her would choose to stay. Rowan never said it aloud, but he stayed because helping her helped him. Her presence softened the noise in his mind, the guilt, the memory of the accident, the echo of Soren's laughter that had followed him like a ghost. Mira didn't know any of that. She only saw a quiet man whose rough hands carried a gentleness she hadn't felt from anyone in months. The slow transformation of the barn mirrored something happening between them. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was something quieter, deeper, a connection forged in shared silence, mutual exhaustion, and the unspoken understanding of two people holding themselves together by threads. Rowan noticed Mira beginning to stand taller. She laughed sometimes, and though it was brief and small, it held sincerity. She cooked extra food and pretended it was because she disliked leftovers, but Rowan saw through the excuse. She began trusting him with more responsibilities around the farm, and each time she handed him a task, there was a softness in her eyes that told him she was learning how to lean on someone again. Meanwhile, Rowan found himself healing in ways he hadn't expected. Working on the farm brought him back to the earth, to the smell of sun-warmed hay, to the rhythm of tasks that required presence instead of thought. Mira's bravery, not the loud kind, but the kind that showed up even when exhausted, pulled him out of the thick, gray fog of guilt he had lived in for a year. But healing rarely happens without another storm first. One late afternoon, as the light mellowed into a golden wash across the fields, Mira received news from the hospital that shattered the fragile progress she had made. Her father's condition had worsened. The doctors were unsure how long he had left. Mira dropped the phone, knees buckling as the truth hit her too fast. Rowan rushed to her side, catching her before she reached the floor. In that moment, her tears soaking into his shirt, her body trembling against his, Rowan realized he wasn't just helping her anymore. He needed her to stay afloat too. Loss had carved wounds in both of them. And standing there, in the kitchen, Rowan felt their grief fold together, like two torn pages pressed into one book. The following days were heavier. Mira spent long hours at the hospital, returning home pale and worn. Rowan took over nearly every farm chore, working past sunset, refusing payment, refusing praise. When Mira broke down one evening in the half-rebuilt barn, saying she was failing her father and failing the farm, Rowan stepped forward with a certainty he hadn't felt in years. She whispered those same words she had spoken the first day. "I could use a strong hand." But this time, her voice was smaller, more vulnerable, like a child asking the world not to abandon her. Rowan placed his hand gently on her back, grounding her like an anchor. The barn creaked softly in the wind, the light slanting through the unfinished roof in long, warm beams. And for the first time since Soren's death, Rowan allowed himself to feel something close to purpose. As winter approached, Mira's father passed away quietly in his sleep. The funeral was simple, surrounded by town members who had known the Hanlon family for generations. Mira stood between her mother and Rowan, drawing strength from both. Afterward, when the mourners dispersed and the air grew still, Mira remained by the graveside, hands clenched. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Rowan stayed with her until the sun dipped behind the hills, the sky painting gold across their shadows. In that silence, something unspoken changed between them. Not a confession, not a promise, just a deep, steady understanding that healing was no longer something they would face separately. Weeks passed. The barn was completed. The farm regained its rhythm. Mira learned to manage the finances with Rowan's patient guidance, and Rowan began opening up about Soren, sharing pieces of his past like fragile glass he finally trusted her to hold. They became something more than companions, more than helpers, something rooted in the kind of connection forged through honesty, resilience, and shared burdens. On the first warm day of spring, Mira stood in the rebuilt barn doorway, sunlight catching her hair, and looked at Rowan with steady, unwavering eyes. She thanked him not for the work or the help, but for staying when leaving would have been easier. Rowan didn't answer with words. He simply stepped beside her, the quiet warmth between them saying everything. Their bond didn't explode into romance. It grew gently, like new leaves on a recovering branch. Mira learned it was okay to lean on someone without feeling weak. Rowan learned that strength isn't found in forgetting grief, but in carrying it with someone who understands. And the community of Ellenshore watched them with warmth, knowing something rare had formed a partnership born not from convenience, but from compassion and timing, and the fragile bravery of two wounded souls who decided to keep trying. If this story touched your heart even a little, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing to Kind of Heart. Your engagement helps us share more stories of hope, healing, and human kindness. Before we end, special request. Comment, "We rise together," if you believe no one should face life's hardest moments alone. And with that, the sun sets gently on Rowan and Mira's story, a reminder that sometimes the strongest hand is simply the one that stays.